This terrifying story is a true experience from Mr. A, who encountered a horrifying event and shared it with us. The world was a much darker place 40 or 50 years ago, around the mid-1970s. In the outskirts of Bangkok, streetlights were rare, and the night was owned by the shadows of towering trees and dense tropical greenery. Back then, a 15-year-old boy named Mr. A lived a life that was anything but easy. His family struggled with poverty, but the lack of money wasn't the biggest problem. His parents were reckless with what little they had, spending every cent as soon as they earned it, without a single thought for tomorrow. This cycle of financial ruin led to a house filled not with love, but with the constant, deafening sound of screaming matches and bitter insults that echoed through their thin wooden walls every single day. Young Mr. A reached his breaking point. The walls of his home felt like they were closing in, suffocating him. One afternoon, after enduring a particularly violent argument, he couldn't take it anymore. He packed a few clothes and essentials into a small bag. He had no plan, no destination, and no idea how he would survive. All he knew was that he had to get away, far away from the toxicity of his home. He walked out of his house at 4 p.m. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, eerie shadows across the dirt roads. He walked for miles, passing through open fields and small, scattered communities. His mind was a storm of confusion and exhaustion. As twilight faded into a deep, bruised purple, the sky turned a heavy, charcoal gray. The scent of damp earth rose to meet him, accompanied by a sharp, cold wind, a warning that a massive storm was about to break. He realized then that he had left with almost nothing. He only had a few cents in his pocket, hardly enough for a meal. Hunger began to gnaw at his stomach, just as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The drizzle quickly turned into a torrential downpour, blinding him. Searching for any kind of shelter, Mr. A spotted a large house standing tall amongst a cluster of overgrown trees. Unlike the neighboring houses, which glowed with the warm, orange light of aura lamps and early electricity, this house was draped in absolute darkness. It was a grand, two-story wooden house, surrounded by a low concrete fence. The garden inside was a tangled mess of weeds and vines, though you could still see the faint traces of its former beauty. Desperate to escape the freezing rain, Mr. A decided to climb over the fence. He just wanted to huddle under the porch. He waded through the wet, waist-high grass until he reached the front door. He tried the knob, but it was locked tight, not surprising for a house that appeared abandoned. Shivering and soaked to the bone, he refused to stay out in the storm. He began to circle the house, looking for another way in. He tried prying at the windows, one after another, but they were all secured. Finally, he reached a corner where the wood had begun to rot from decades of moisture. He found a gap wide enough for a slender boy like him to squeeze through. With a surge of desperate strength, he kicked at the decayed planks until the opening was large enough. He slowly crawled inside, leaving the howling wind behind. The interior of the house was tomb silent and pitch black. But as his eyes adjusted, Mr. A realized something unsettling. The house didn't look abandoned. Every piece of furniture was exactly where it should be. The large sofa, an old-fashioned television, a heavy wooden dining table. However, everything was covered in thick, white dust cloths. It looked as if the owners had intended to protect everything from dust while they were away. The atmosphere was heavy and freezing. In the darkness, the white-shrouded furniture looked like a gathering of ghosts, standing perfectly still in every corner of the room. Exhausted, Mr. A collapsed onto the sofa. He didn't care how strange the house felt anymore. He just needed to rest. He sat there for hours, listening to the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the corrugated metal roof. 1 hour turned into 3. By nearly midnight, the storm showed no sign of stopping. His stomach was cramping from hunger. He decided to venture into the kitchen, hoping to find some dry rice or maybe a tin of fish left behind in the pantry. He opened the cabinets, his hands trembling, but there was nothing. Only the smell of stale air and the oppressive silence of the house. Frustrated and restless, he looked toward the stairs. He thought that maybe, just maybe, there was something to eat or a better place to sleep on the second floor. He climbed the wooden stairs, each step letting out a sharp, agonizing creak that seemed to echo through the entire structure. The stairs were L-shaped, with a small landing before turning toward the upper floor. When he reached the top, he saw a bathroom to his left and a large master bedroom to his right. He stood before the bedroom door, reaching for the handle, but a thought suddenly stopped him. Who would keep food in a bedroom? He pulled his hand back, deciding it was better to just go back downstairs and wait out the night on the sofa. But just as he was about to take his first step back down, his heart stopped. A sound he hadn't heard in hours cut through the silence. Click. It was the unmistakable sound of the front door's lock being turned. Mr. A froze, his blood turning to ice. Through the window, the faint light from a distant street lamp revealed the silhouettes of 2 people stepping into the house. The owners are back. Terror flooded his mind. He knew that breaking and entering was a serious crime. He imagined being hauled off to the police station, having to face his parents in utter shame. In a blind panic, he turned around and ducked into the master bedroom he had almost entered moments ago. He closed the door as silently as possible and scanned the room for a hiding spot. There was an old iron bed in the center, a wardrobe, and another TV set. Without thinking, Mr. A scrambled under the iron bed, pressing his body against the cold floor and holding his breath until his lungs burned. Seconds later, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. The bedroom door was flung open. From his vantage point under the bed, Mr. A could only see the lower legs of 2 people. One was a woman in a professional skirt and high heels. The other was a man in jeans and leather boots. What was most terrifying was that despite the house being shrouded in darkness, they didn't turn on a single light. They moved through the room as if they could see perfectly in the blackness. An argument erupted instantly. It started with whispered accusations and quickly escalated into a violent shouting match. The man was accusing the woman of having an affair with someone at her office. Then came the sound of a slap, hard and sickening. It was followed by the sound of the woman sobbing, a sound so full of despair that it made Mr. A's skin crawl. Hiding under the bed, he began to shake uncontrollably. His fear of being caught was being replaced by a pure, visceral horror at the violence unfolding just inches away from him. He watched their feet move frantically back and forth as the struggle intensified. "I told you to end it. If you don't leave him, you're dead," the man roared. Then, the sound of his heavy boots stomped out of the room, leaving the woman behind. She sat on the edge of the bed, her muffled sobs sounding hollow and broken. Mr. A felt a deep sense of pity for her, but he didn't dare move a muscle. Suddenly, the man's footsteps returned, faster and more purposeful this time. The door burst open again. The woman let out a sharp, terrified scream. Then came the sounds of a brutal struggle, heavy thuds, and the sound of something sharp tearing through fabric and flesh. The woman's screams transitioned into a wet, gurgling sound in her throat before everything went deathly silent. Mr. A felt something warm and sticky beginning to drip from the mattress above. Drip, drip. It hit the floor just inches from his face. The metallic scent of fresh blood filled the cramped space under the bed. He tried to pull his body away from the growing puddle, consumed by a level of fear he didn't know was possible. He saw the shadow of the man standing perfectly still by the bed for a long moment before his footsteps slowly faded away as he left the room. Silence returned to the house. Mr. A thought it was finally over. He was preparing to crawl out and run for his life. But then, his heart nearly failed him. A soft, rhythmic sobbing started coming from the bed once more. Is she still alive? He wondered, a tiny flicker of hope igniting in his chest. But as the crying continued above him, his eyes caught something near the bedroom door that made his soul wither. He saw the feet of the same woman walk past the bed and toward the door. His mind went blank. If she was walking toward the door, then who or what was still crying on the bed? Driven by a terrifying, morbid curiosity, Mr. A did the most reckless thing of his life. He slowly poked his head out from under the edge of the bed and looked up at the mattress. He found himself staring directly into the face of the woman. She was already leaning over the edge, looking down at him. Her face was as white as paper, and her eyes were wide, bulging, and stained crimson with blood that leaked from the corners of her lids. She stared deep into his eyes with an expression of pure, unadulterated agony and malice. "Dear, there's someone else in our house," her voice rasped, cold as a winter grave. The moment the words left her lips, heavy footsteps began to slam against the stairs again. The door was ripped open. Mr. A tried to scramble back under the bed, But it was too late. The man walked straight to the bedside and dropped to his knees, peering directly into the shadows where Mr. A was hiding. The image that met him was a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The man's face was a pale, bloodless mask of dried skin stretched over bone. Most terrifying of all, he had no eyes, only two hollow black pits that seemed to swallow the light. The woman crawled down beside him, her body riddled with dozens of jagged stab wounds. Dark, clotted blood oozed from the gashes without stopping. They both stared at Mr. A with faces twisted into horrific, inhuman grins. His mind snapped. The sheer terror was too much to bear, and his consciousness faded into black. He didn't remember how he escaped that house. He woke up in the gray light of dawn, the first rays of the sun peeking through the rotted wood. He found himself still shivering under the bed, but the bed was empty. There were no bodies, no scent of blood, and no sounds of crying. Everything was still. The white cloths still covered the furniture, undisturbed. Mr. A crawled out and ran down the stairs, diving through the hole he had entered the night before. He looked over the fence and saw the neighborhood coming to life. People were starting their morning routines, birds were chirping, and the world looked normal, as if the midnight horror had never happened. He waited for a moment when no one was looking, scaled the fence, and ran all the way back to his own home. When he arrived, his parents were waiting. They screamed at him, cursing him for disappearing for the night and causing them trouble. But this time, Mr. A didn't say a word. He didn't fight back. He sat there in silence, listening to their angry voices with a profound sense of gratitude. He realized then that the screaming and the fighting he had hated so much was a paradise compared to the cold, dead silence of that house. After that encounter, Mr. A was a changed person. He never thought about running away again. And while he never went back to discover the history of that house, he knew, deep in his heart, that sometimes the suffering we face at home is a sanctuary compared to the horrors that wait for us in the dark corners of the world, where no one can hear us scream. If you enjoyed this true Thai horror story, subscribe to Tale After Dark for more chilling tales every week.